So, most of what we've done so far in our course has taken place inside a single cell, whether it's been in the mitochondria, a chloroplast, moving things in and out across cell membranes, or talking about the molecules that are making up a cell. But one of the things all living things have to do is maintain homeostasis. And this was maintaining that internal set of conditions. And that works from the cellular level all the way up to the organism level. So for things like single cells, all the way up to blue whales, it's going to be the same concept all the way up. We want to keep the inside of an organism, those cells, its tissues, organs, and the whole organism, we want to maintain an internal set of conditions. And this is because all those reactions that are happening inside cells, the ability to move things in and out of cells, are happening because of proteins, which are held together by things like hydrogen bonds and other intermolecular attractions and intramolecular attractions. So what we've got going on is we've got to make sure that these proteins stay happy, that they're nice and stable, and they have a pretty good environment so they don't denature, and they always have a pretty stable set of shapes known as conformations. And homeostasis basically boils down to the idea of that old story, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. We don't want that porridge to be too hot, and we don't want that porridge to be too cold. We want that porridge to be just right. And the way we're going to keep those enzymes happy is with something known as a feedback loop. And the first type of feedback loop we're going to take a look at is very similar to something we might be kind of familiar with. This is the idea of a thermostat, something that regulates the temperature in our house. And this is going to be called a negative feedback loop. And the reason we call it a negative feedback loop is because we are always going to be working against the change. So whatever change is happening in the environment or inside the cell, we're always going to be kind of countering that change and working against it. So if it's too hot in your home, or if it's too hot in the cell, what's going to happen is that's going to be sensed by a sensor. And as that temperature goes up, it's going to end up triggering a control center, the idea of the thermostat, to bring the temperature back down. It's going to do that by sending a signal to an effector. And that control center will turn on that effector like an air conditioner, and we'll get cool air pumping out, and our temperature will start to drop, and it will lower, and it will go back towards kind of the bottom part of that set point, at which point the control center will sense that we're kind of below where we would like to be, and it will shut off that effector, and then that temperature can start climbing back up again. And if we were to graph these types of feedback loops often end up making the levels of homeostasis look a lot like some sort of sine wave or wave function that we might have seen in math class before. Sorry for the reference. But it's going to give us that kind of upper limit and a lower limit. And this is what we mean by homeostasis. We're not talking about a constant stable amount like body temperature, for example. It's never exactly the same at any one particular hour of the day. It's going to change frequently throughout the day. It's going to wobble back and forth between a higher limit and a lower limit. And when we graph that over time, that's going to kind of give us that concept of a wave function, because when the temperature gets too hot, the negative feedback loop kicks in, tries to cool things down. And when it gets too low, it either shuts off or it kicks in some warming up sequences. They're going to raise that temperature back up. So that's the negative feedback loop. We're always working to counteract change. So we're always working against change. That's why we call it a negative feedback loop. Now, the opposite of this is known as a positive feedback loop, and it's positive because we're always reinforcing change. We're always kind of getting away from that set point or those ideal values. Now, there aren't as many great examples of this, but there are a couple examples we'll see throughout the course. The best way we could talk about this is if we go back to that thermostat idea. where if it's getting hot in the house or the home, instead of that air conditioning coming on, the thermostat in a positive feedback loop would turn on the heater. So what would end up happening is we'd be reinforcing that change. And the hotter it got, the more the heater would come on. And the hotter it got in the house, the more heat would be coming pumped out of the heater. And initially, this is hard for us to imagine the advantages of this because we're always kind of working against that change. We're driving things away from homeostasis. But there are a couple specific examples where this is really advantageous for cells to use. So to sum up, we have two ways to maintain homeostasis: the negative feedback loop, where we're always working against change and whatever variable we're looking at always kind of ends up resembling some sort of wave function where if it gets too high, we're trying to drive it back down. And when it gets too low, we're trying to build it back up. And then the positive feedback loop, where we're always reinforcing change and driving things away from that set point. And the whole reason we're doing this is to keep those enzymes happy so they don't get denatured and they maintain their best conformation with their active sites so they can catalyze those chemical reactions, or in general, proteins doing their job of allowing materials to cross in and out of cells.